thank you very much to everybody who's made this happen across the organisations in government and Global Governments Forum and all the partners. It's really fantastic to be here today. This is actually my idea of a nightmare in one sense, because I'm here to talk about data in front of a room of people who know an awful lot more about data than I do. And actually there's quite a lot of you in this room who know that you know more than me about data. So I will try and give the consumer and the sometimes bluffer's guide to use of data. One of the things that a few things to say about the importance of data in public service. So I think about data like this. Today, because of better use of data across our public services, we will save at least one extra life in the health service. Because of our better use of data today, we will most certainly save lives in Ukraine. Because of our better use of data in government and in agencies, we will help somebody get a job. We will help somebody access the benefits that they need. We will help them get their passport. We will help them get their driving licenses. There is not a single part of what we do across the public services that isn't now reliant on data. You all know that because many of you here are the people who make that happen. But what you know even better than I do is that if we can make our organisation, the civil service, and with all of our public service partners across the country and actually internationally, smarter, more confident in the use of data, tomorrow or maybe next week or maybe next year, we will save more lives, we will get more people into jobs, and we will do it in a more cost-effective way, and we will do it quicker. And so the prize for us is huge. I hope I have done something over the last maybe year or so to signal from my position about how important I think data is to the civil service and public services by the aforementioned, one big thing. I hope at least this audience has heard about one big thing. I sort of have been trotting around a number of audiences and check whether people have heard about one big thing. I hope people here have. It's an idea that we came up with through a discussion amongst permanent secretary colleagues almost a year ago today, when I wanted to do two things. One is address one of the most important issues that I think we have to tackle across the civil service, which is skills and finding smarter, quicker ways to equip civil servants with the skills that they need, and particularly data skills. And the second was to try and start creating a stronger sense of community across the civil service. We often talk about, one civil service, but actually those of us who work in it know that it in fact is a very, very large number of different organisations. And I want to start creating things that we all have in common. So this idea of, it's become the title, One Big Thing. It's actually just what I said is, can we just not come up with one big thing that every civil servant across the country can do together and can have in common? And why don't we make it, 1 day's worth of data training that everybody has to do this year, every civil servant has to do. And so 12 months later, after a lot of hard work for people working off the side of their desks, we have now launched One Big Thing, which I hope most people in this audience, well, in fact, if you are a civil servant and you don't know you've started your One Big Thing training, please make sure you record today on the One Big Thing platform as your One Big Thing training, because you will just do. And of course, there's a dashboard, there's a leaderboard across departments to show who's doing what and when. Final thing I will say about data, maybe which is important for this audience to hear, is there is now not a single table that I sit around, with ministers around the cabinet table, sometimes in those moments around the Cobra table, where data is not part of the conversation. Through the the trauma and tragedy of COVID, I think we accelerated the use of data in senior level decision making in a way we probably would never have done without actually the pandemic, and that has been carried on and carried forward. There isn't a single topic left in government where there isn't something called a task force and there isn't a dashboard to go alongside it. Every single conversation is informed by data. So perhaps we'll pick up some of the big opportunities and challenges in that along the way.
Thank you. That certainly clears up the background to the name One Big Thing. It was very effective as a marketing tool. I remember coming around, one big what? and then you start to inquire, and it really focuses the attention on, as you say, skills for everyone, raising those skills, whether they're technical expertise or broader policy experts, just understanding data more effectively. What about your own knowledge and experience and sort of professional career in relation to digital and data? Were there any big moments in the roles that you've done where you sort of recognized, hang on, this is really important, I should get to understand it better?
So there have been a few, definitely big moments. COVID was, as I say, I think it was transformational actually for me in how data was being used at the very top tables of government. And I mean, I've said this before, and I've said it to the faces of many colleagues at ONS, for example, that there were many heroes in COVID, and there were many public service heroes in COVID. But I always make sure that statisticians and our data experts get a shout out as some of the heroes of COVID, because without the systems and processes that were put in place, and many of them were put in place. I mean, let's be honest about it. We'll all be talking about this, I'm sure, in the COVID inquiry in the months to come. Is when the pandemic hit, we didn't have the data that we needed, and we didn't have it in the format that we needed it to either take decisions or to explain to the public what was happening. And actually there's a few people in this room who were absolutely central to that effort to both get the systems in place across all walks of life, across public services, across society and across the economy, so that we could get the data together, and then crucially to find ways of displaying and talking about that data to a non-technical audience. I mean, that's people like me, but crucially our ministers, and then go on to explain to the public why the decisions were being taken in the way that they were taken. It was extraordinary, and I've said it before. It's amazing the journey that we went on from right from the outset. We knew we needed what in the standard crisis management thing, for those who've sort of been through that training, a CRIP, a common recognised information picture. Now we mostly call them dashboards, but literally it started as something that people were inputting into Excel spreadsheets and sending around to each other late at night. But after several months, we had a sort of real-time updated dashboard that was not only being used in government, but was actually the vast majority of it publicly available, so that people could understand what was happening in the pandemic in their location. And that there will certainly, I suspect, be private sector partners in the room who are thinking, oh my God, this is absolutely nothing. We did that 20 years ago. What on earth is wrong with you? But it is what it is. The great leap forward in the use of data during the pandemic is, I think, a pivotal moment. It was not inevitable that we continued that. There are many things that this is sort of littered through our history as a sort of public administration, is that we discover new things in moments of crisis, and then we forget them the moment the crisis is over. And this is not one of those things that sort of got left on the cutting room floor as we went on. As I said, it's now sort of everywhere. We now have a political class that expects to take all of their decisions informed with almost live data in the way that they did in COVID. And we have educated an awful lot more senior decision makers in data, the questions that they should be asking, and what they should be looking for in their data. So I think this is, but I would say data has been present all the way through my career. I started my career in the national security world, and one of the first things I remember doing was sitting there looking at submarine availability, which was, back then it was all, literally, I think somebody drew some of the charts by hand that we were looking at. It's been there all the time as a core part of it, but the transformation over the last few years has been extraordinary.
Do you find yourself asking different and more complex questions as a consequence of engaging with so much data now?
So I hope the answer to that, but there'll be others in the room to whom I address those questions. I hope my answer is no, oddly enough. I hope I'm asking simpler questions. Because I think this is, from the user and the consumer point of view of data, one of the things that, one of the learning experiences from COVID is that great temptation, especially in the early days when it was a massive data, that you've got that wood for trees problem and sort of signal and noise, and actually learning to get smarter at the sort of questions that you should be asking of the data, actually, rather than getting more complex and diving into the detail, which is sort of the job of other people, is actually to try and lift yourself back up and try and ask the simpler questions about, but what is this data really telling us? What are the trends that we should be looking for here, and trying not to obsess, but people like me, because I sort of love obsessing and diving in, is about what is that data point and why is it? It's just sort of, okay, I'll ask that question outside the room, because the question we really need to focus is what's the big story here.
I think what we saw was kind of both sides of the fence, if you like, learning and developing how to provide information for effective use as well. So from the analytical point of view, often when you're providing analysis into a bit of a black hole, it can be difficult to form it in a way that can be used. But there was such a clear common purpose during the pandemic and an urgency that made the system work. We haven't necessarily got those same circumstances, thankfully, right now. Do you see any risk of some of this rolling back, and how do we avoid that?
I don't think there is a danger of rollback. Particularly, I think that leap forward, that transformation, feels like it was deep enough and wide enough across, certainly officialdom, that it feels to me like it's here to stay. The things that could change are obviously, certainly at the sort of the where I sit, the personality of the individuals who sit around the cabinet table, who are your senior decision makers, can make a really big difference. At the moment we have a Prime Minister who, is a bit like me. For those of you who have sort of come across it will recognise this, that by the time you've got to Annex Z of the detailed data that he wants to see before it's like, wow, this is somebody who really wants to understand. That the personalities who are making the decisions can make a change. But then I think in general, the reason I'm optimistic that we won't roll back is that, say we get a totally different group of politicians tomorrow, because so much of our lives outside government, we're now used to data being used to provide better services to us, whatever it is, whether it's your car or your bank or whatever it is, that those are now the expectations for both the public about how they want to consume public services, and they're also the I remember when David Cameron came in, and he asked, well, it wasn't called an app then, but why can't I have this? Kind of on a tablet that sits in front of me, and I can't, what's all this paper? Why can't I just have it done like this? And okay, that's quite a good question. we may be getting there on that, but it's a separate thing. But I think that's why we probably won't roll back. But there's an opportunity and a threat in that, which is as the expectations change in the consumer, we're just going to have to move faster and faster to keep up with their expectations about how they will consume data, whether it's the public on the public services or it's politicians as decision makers.
Which is a good thing to have that drive for innovation, because the public are customers and consumers in our services, which takes me on to innovation and ethics in particular. And, this morning on my feeds that came through my phone, there was another large language model announced. It was called Falcon 180B, which sounds like if you're going to name an evil algorithm, that's what you'd name it. But interestingly, it declared that it had no guardrails around it. So I thought that's quite an interesting development. Yeah. And I tested that in a suitable way, and interestingly, it didn't seem to have many guardrails around it. And I thought, well, let's put it to good use. So I asked it to generate a question that I could put to you. So this is always risky, isn't it?
Tranmere Rovers is the football team I support.
Let's see. So the question I asked, write me a question about AI to put to the UK Cabinet Secretary. And this is what it came up with. What role do you see AI playing in the future of public service delivery, and how do you think the government should prepare for this shift? Which I thought was quite a good question, actually.
Yeah, no, it's that's all right. Yeah, no. Didn't ask, favourite colour's red. No. This is the big question. Yeah. For us, for this audience, whether you're working in government, whether you're working with government, you're working in the private sector. This is one of the biggest questions we have to answer, and we have to answer it so fast. For all the reasons that this audience knows even better than I do, and it's why. Give it a plug. Prime Minister is very. The Prime Minister will host the AI Safety Summit in November at Bletchley Park. I actually spent quite a lot of my day yesterday. There may be one or two in this audience who were at those quite. They saw, I'm afraid, my frustration at our inability to yet answer these questions in the pace and the way that I think we have to. I think the thing that we have to do is, well, first of all, I hope that lots of the people who are working in the frontier sort of firms have taken a bit of time away from their screens to go and watch Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It's quite a good film. It's historically inaccurate in very frustrating ways if you're a boring historian of these things, but just let that go, I say to myself. But just the general theme of individuals who are involved in those Prometheus moments, the cliff edge moments, whatever they are, the step change moments in technology, in the future of humanity and this rather small and peculiar planet that we live on. And governments need to think it through as well, and we have to do it fast. But we have to talk about both the positive. The opportunities are boundless and endless, but what we have to do is take everybody with us on that journey about the showing them the opportunities. We know AI for good is already being deployed and making a real difference. Day before yesterday, with some colleagues who were in the joint DHSC, NHS England AI sort of deployment team, were showing me the app on the phone that clinicians are using to spot brain tumours faster than stroke risk faster than they've ever done before. Using AI, it's just extraordinary. We have to show people the opportunity and the power, and be open about that. But we also need to agree for ourselves and with public consent, and probably internationally, ideally, those guardrails that we are going to put in place. And that's what would, as it were, I hope we'll be able to answer this question by November, because if we don't start to answer it now, we could have lost the race already, because what we all know, because this is the history of the adoption of technology by humanity, one incident where it goes wrong can actually, transform how that technology is seen for generations to come. And what we don't want to do is, lose the opportunity and the possibility through the careless use. The final thing is we have to find ways to explain this to the public, which we haven't done yet.
Do you see a challenge in that? Is there any reason why we shouldn't be able to engage the public more directly on this?
There are a number of challenges in engaging with the public. I mean, one is taking something that is actually, in one sense, there are quite simple explanations for what's going on. But at the other end, the moment somebody asks follow-up questions, you get quite technical quite quickly, and it honestly becomes quite mind-boggling about the power of some black boxes, especially when the people who've invented them can't tell you what's going on inside.
No,
and that starts to get really quite scary, I think, is when the person, had the chance to do, people who've written sort of their own large language models, and you start to say, well, and they sort of show you some of the answers, and you say, well, can you talk me through how? I can't actually.
Yeah.
I think that is really quite an intimidating thing for some people to hear. For some people, they think it's amazing, and it is. But there's the other side too, which is, hold on a minute, most other technologies, no matter how much we've developed the internal combustion engine, you can pretty much, there's somebody with a modern version of an oily rag who can tell you what's going on inside and can explain and talk about how you can change its performance. We have to maintain the ability to explain what's happening here. Otherwise, we go. But the other big issue is trust. You see this all around the world. Is the public in every walk of life, not just in their interactions with government, but with any provision of any service, whether it's public or private, and any source of information, we're becoming more sceptical, and we're looking for more and more diverse opinions in different places from where generations before us got their information. So actually finding the channels to communicate in what genuinely can be trusted information is really important. Now, go back to COVID, it is still true today that two other heroes, Chris and Patrick, are still some of the most trusted figures walking the streets of the United Kingdom. And that really mattered in being able to explain to an intimidated and genuinely afraid and interested public what was going on. Politicians are now just in a box that's different, and you need these people. Who are the people who are going to do that for us on AI, who, as it were, are experts, but on also trying to sell something?
Oh, that's always been the case.
So that is the challenge.
And I think, you've touched on a really interesting subject for one big thing for people in this room and beyond, understanding how the model changes with the use of large language models within the way we work. Because as you say, it isn't possible to understand everything that's going on within it. And that's why you get hallucinations. And that's why when you ask the same question, you will often get a different answer, because it's just developing a probability model, which is quite fascinating.
I think one of the biggest things that we have to, there's lots of different things, but I think the bias is the thing. Every time humanity has invented and then adopted new technologies, there are winners and losers, and we have to be more conscious than I think we've ever been before about the biases in the data and all that sort of, things that everyone here already knows about. But in societies all around the world, when the way our democracies work, the way our public engagement trust works is driven by increasingly by a sense of participation and equality. Is this thing that you're all championing, is this really making my life better? We have to be very, very, very conscious of how we take the whole of society with us in these technology changes, because if you don't, if you leave a very significant proportion of society behind, I mean, that's how revolutions start.
That's a great way to end our session. So you enjoyed Oppenheimer, but people want to know, have you yet seen Barbie?
I haven't, actually. I'm afraid, in sort of slightly typical way, my mum, I have 3 small girls, my mum took them to see Barbie, and I haven't taken them to see Oppenheimer, so I'm afraid I haven't seen Barbie. I think I probably wouldn't understand it. I'm told there are depths to Barbie that one couldn't possibly imagine, and it would mostly go over my head.
Another time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We can thank Simon for the chat. Thank you very much indeed.